My name is Brandon Mitchell, the creator and author of Giju's Gift, and you're listening to True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Brandon Mitchell about his recent presentations about the art of storytelling. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Based in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Brandon is the founder of Birch Bark Comics and creator of the Sacred Circles comic series, which draws upon his Mi'kmaq heritage. He has written 5 books with the Healthy Aboriginal Network: Lost Innocence, Drawing Hope, River Run, Making It Right, and Emily's Choice. Brandon has written and illustrated Jean Paul's daring adventure stories from Old Mobile for the University of Alabama, as well as 2 Mi'kmaq language-based stories for the Litskui Education Dictorate. He has also completed an art installation for Heritage and Culture New Brunswick. His most recent project is Giju's Gift, illustrated by Veronica Baranova. During our chat, Brandon reflected on his recent talks at Montreal Comic Con about preserving Indigenous oral history through graphic novels, and Toronto Comic Arts Festival entitled Writing and Drawing Difficult Topics for Kids Comics. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Brandon Mitchell about his recent presentations about the art of storytelling. Brandon Mitchell, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I appreciate your time. Before we get started, though, with the questions, I want to ask you, what's on your bedside reading table? What are you reading today?
What am I reading today? Well, actually, I'm finally getting back to Dune. I'm actually reading Children of Dune right now, and really enjoying it. I kick myself for not reading it sooner.
Did you watch the more recent movie by Denis Villeneuve?
Yes, I did, and I actually wanted to get ahead of the movie, and I read the first book, and I was like, no, I'll just stick with that one. I won't dive deeper after that, and I got bit when I found out that there was a larger series and kept on reading.
There you go, lots to read, for sure. Well, appreciate your time. What I wanted to do is follow up with your recent presentation that you made at Montreal Comic Con. I wanted to get your thoughts about the event, specifically about your talk that you I wanted to get your thoughts on the talk that you presented called Preserving Indigenous Oral History Through Graphic Novels. Wonder if you could briefly summarize your talk.
Montreal Comic Con was a blast. It was a lot of fun. It was a little bit nerve-wracking. I don't want to, when I was doing my presentation, being in the environment, seeing the amount of people that were there, I was like, who's going to come to my presentation? And I was anticipating, I'll be happy if 20 people show up. I'll create this nice little intimate environment, and I'll probably have a smaller room. But when I got prepared for the talk, I was in a large room, and there was a lineup of people, and I was like, oh dear. And people started coming in. I had to have spoken to at least there had to be over 100 people in that in the room. Yeah. So that was really it was a great experience, and I was nervous, but then once I started going, the jitters were gone, and it was it's easy for me to talk about storytelling, just because of how I've been told stories, and that's how I kind of that's how I shared this presentation as as an Indigenous person, and then just kind of reflecting on how stories were told to me, and I was sharing my experiences with storytelling in the community, and how I was trying to capture that in not just in my writing, but in the other projects that I've been doing. So that was really great. We talked a lot. We talked a lot about not so much. Well, we talk a lot about the importance of storytelling, but I focus also on how I was told these stories, and how I took these stories for granted. How I just thought everybody knew these things, and it was only as I got older that not everybody knows, or not everyone had these same opportunities to hear these types of stories the way I have. So that was kind of like that's how we kind of started the conversation.
Right. Do you see that there's an urgent need to preserve Indigenous oral history?
There is one thing that we talked about, or one thing that I talked about too, was that there's been many. We've been researched to death. There's tons of reports. There's tons of research done on us as a people, and I've been also a victim of these studies. And one thing that I've always noticed at the end of any type of research that goes out is that we never really see the end product, or if we see the end product, it's boring. So how do you why would you want to how can you engage an audience if it's just, to me, if it's just written words, and if it doesn't capture what, like, the essence of what the people that are sharing their stories, if it doesn't capture the essence of what they're trying to say. So that's one thing that's always bothered me when it came to how our stories have been collected in the past. And I wanted to add an element that is engaging for me and has been engaging, and I know that we're onto something, because it's engaging to not just a larger audience, but to people in the community that go back and see these stories visually.
Now, do you think there's a concern that more elders are passing on, like, unfortunately, leaving this world, without conveying these stories to the next generation?
Yeah, that's another urgent issue. And hopefully, what I'm trying to do is not just preserve those stories, but hopefully engage more youth in the community to seek out elders and hear the stories that they have to share. You hear this thing about, during Remembrance Day, speak to a veteran, or, veterans want to share their stories. Well, elders also in a community want to share their stories. And I see those, almost in tandem. And, they have a lot of stories to tell, and it's important to hear those stories and to be part. It's such a, what's the word I'm looking for? There's just a certain connection that you have when you're when you know that you're going to be told a story from an elder. Mm-hmm. So it's just one of those things that I'm always cognizant of and grateful for when I get those opportunities.
Sure. Now, do you think that this might be painting a bad picture, folks? But do you think the next generation just isn't paying attention? 9 times out of 10, we go, "Oh, they're just like old folks. They don't know anything. Why would we listen to them?" Do you think that might be the issue?
I don't think that's the issue. I think just because, like I said, there's been a lot of there's been a lot of reports done. There's been a lot of studies done. I think what happens is that when elders or even community members are approached to tell their stories, they're doing it with a good intention that people are going to read it, or people are going to be exposed to it. What ends up happening is that these things just end up getting shelved, or it doesn't reach the intended audience that that we as people sharing these stories are hoping that it reaches. It just ends up collecting dust, or gets filed away in some federal office, or it gets buried online. It doesn't get the proper attention that it deserves. So I think that's where it's at. I think it's about giving these stories the attention that they deserve and the platform that they deserve.
So in your talk, what modern storytelling techniques did you recommend?
It wasn't so much modern techniques. It was just, as mentioned before, I went to school for animation. So when elders, or when I'm hearing these stories, I can kind of fill in those gaps, or, when they're talking, they're sharing their stories as a narrator. And if you know the area or the region that you're in, then you can kind of fill in the blanks visually, or that's how I'm able to do it. Whenever I hear stories from elders, I make sure to understand like the region I'm in and know the environment that I'm in. So when they're telling a story with those things already given. Like they assume that you know these things already, like the landscape. I think that's what I add to the mix, is that I do a lot of visual research when I'm hearing the story, and then how to translate it into a script. I'll do the background work and make sure that, like we have the river looks the way it's supposed to look. The valley is supposed to look the way it looks, right? So when I'm taking readers on this journey, they're going to see these landmarks, and these landmarks are important also for the community members, because they're going to see themselves, or they're going to recognize those same visual landmarks, and they're going to be reconnected with the story that they're telling too.
Now, I wondered, in your talk, did you provide any examples of current graphic novels or literature that you see as doing a proper job of recording this oral history properly?
Oh, for sure. Well, the whole basis of the conversation was talking about the graphic novel that I was part of, This Place, 150 Years Retold. I showed them a lot of like the process that I went through in collecting these stories and honoring those that were part of the salmon raid that took place in our community back in 1981. So there was a lot of photos that were taken, but they were kind of just like snippets. And then what I was trying to do was get the stories from the things that weren't captured. Like when I was asked to participate in this graphic novel, I knew right away what I wanted to write about. And but I knew that I didn't want to duplicate what was already out there. So I still had to try to find my story, or what was the story I was trying to tell. And it goes back to remembering the stories that I was told, but I was like, you know what, I want to ask other people. And it was my wife that recommended, I should talk to my mother-in-law, because she worked at the band office during the time of the raids. And I approached her and I said, look, I got this project. This is what I want to write about. Just want to know, I want to know what you remember, or if you want to share, can you share what you remember? And she stopped, and she was eating, and she stops. She processes what I was telling her, because I could talk pretty fast also. And she didn't respond right away. And then when she did, all she said was, you have to write about the first raid. Mm. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. And then so she starts talking about this first raid. So I write down all these notes, and I was like, oh my, this is fascinating. I never knew about this. Before I submit my first draft to the editor, I give her the script, and she doesn't even read past the first few lines. And she says, nope, you didn't write about the first raid. And I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And she was like, you didn't write about the first raid. I said, but no, everything that you talked about, it's in there. I said, yeah, but that's the first raid you're talking about. You're talking about 1981. You didn't write about the first raids. And I was like, what do you mean? There was more raids? And she's like, yes, there were. So these were ongoing. These were reoccurring events. It boiled over 1981. So once I understood that, that's when I had my story. I was like, so these things happened before. And even in my research, when I was trying to find research about the previous raids, I had no problem finding information about the salmon raid in 1981. And newspaper clippings or just reports, they would just say previous raids. That's all it was. Any mention of the raids that happened before, they were just summed up into one sentence. Mm-hmm. Previous raids. So that's when I knew. I said, okay, we have to talk about what happened beforehand, and I want to talk about the lead up to June 11th, 1981.
So a lot of history there that you have to do research on.
Yeah, and the thing was, the history was all based off of, it wasn't in books, mm-hmm. It was community research, and it was not so much a leap of faith, but there was a lot of trust on both sides, because I didn't want to do something that was half-assed, and I knew how important it was to tell these stories. I was trying to handle this with as much care as possible to respect those that were sharing their experiences with me.
Right. That you translated into the story that you put in your book.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned animation there, and I know that's a little bit different from a graphic novel. Do you think stories can also be conveyed through animation as well?
Oh, for sure. But once again, though, it's about doing the research, right? Or understanding, as a storyteller, I think we're all natural storytellers. When it comes to Indigenous people telling their stories, you should already know your surroundings. That's been my understanding when I receive these stories. So I should already know where these landmarks are. So they don't even mention them. They'll just say it in passing, right? And I got to fill in those blanks with my imagination. And the great thing with animation is that, once again, it's all about doing the visual research. Like in our community, finding the lake. What does it look like? And what's a significant, powerful image for these landmarks? And how do I convey that in a story? It's things that I took for granted, even like when I was studying animation, like these techniques I was taught. I was like, oh, it just kind of goes hand in hand. Like the techniques I was taught in college go so well with translating Indigenous stories, or like taking Indigenous stories and visualizing them.
How linked is the environment, and you said landmarks, to Indigenous stories? Is it that intrinsic that it doesn't come across if it's not well positioned?
I think it's so connected, but it's one of those things that I take for granted, because I'm just like, when I'm hearing a story, and if it's from back home, I already know what they're talking about. Like I know, I can already envision it. And it's my responsibility when I get these stories, if I have permission to tell them, retell the stories. And that's another thing too, to have permission to retell these stories. I want to make sure that it's personal for me, because it's another layer of intimacy, because I'm sharing landmarks that are significant to our community with a larger audience.
I wanted to ask you, you said that room was full when you did your presentation. I wanted to know what sort of feedback you got from attendees during your talk. How did they respond?
Oh, it was so it was great. I thought they gave me the 5-minute mark when I was done my allotted time, and I opened it up for questions. Yeah, the questions, they came a coming. And a lot of them, there were some really great questions, really great interaction with the crowd. We talked about appropriation, the fine line between appropriation and appreciation. Someone asked a question about, they have an Indigenous character in their story. And that's when I just kind of said, it's just fine line between appreciation and appropriation. And my recommendation would be, collaborate, but also give proper credit. But at the same time, if you're taking too much, then you got to leave it. Like you can't use it.
Right. Understood. Well, wanted to talk also about another presentation you made at the Toronto Comic Arts Festival this year. Slightly different topic. You talked about writing and drawing difficult topics for kids' comics. I wonder if you could comment a bit about what that session was all about.
Yeah, it's been a busy summer. Mm-hmm. But yeah, when I was there, we were Veronica and I were invited to present on this, and it was to expand on the topics that were touched upon in Gaju's Gift. Enough time has kind of passed too, where our target audience has been exposed to the book, and we've been receiving feedback, and that's how we got the invitation. What was great about this one, it was creators talking to creators. Yeah, so that was the basis for this one. We had some really great conversation with fellow creators, and wondering, how were we able to convey heavy topics to a young audience. And it was one of those, once again, I don't think about these things, I just do. And I try to tell stories, or my method of telling stories is, if I'm having a hard time understanding it, then that means my nieces and nephews won't understand it. So whenever I'm telling a story or writing a story, if I know who my target audience is, and luckily I have a big enough family to kind of test it out on, I was like, if they don't get it, then I'm not doing a good job. So that's kind of how I frame my storytelling. Beforehand, it used to be my own kids, but now they're getting older, so I've got to rely on my niece and nephews to kind of get them to be engaged, but then to also ask questions, but in a way that they're comfortable asking those questions. Like they're not asking too far out questions. Like they're able to follow the breadcrumbs that I'm giving them. Right.
Now, I've seen some storytellers use, sugarcoat the story and sort of make it sort of all pretty and avoid the subject completely, while trying to get their idea across. Do you think that's a fair thing for the reader?
No, it's not. I guess this goes back to also how I was told stories. So the stories that I was told too, they weren't just of legends. They weren't just of, big events that happened, like national events that, that might have took place in our community. But there were other things that happened and in our community, such as, like my parents and my mother-in-law, they've experienced going to day schools, and how they told their stories to me at different stages of my life. So it was kind of like going back in time and trying to share how those stories were told to me at a younger age, and then doing that same thing to readers that have not been exposed to this before. Does that make sense? Like, that's how I've been.
Yeah, you're as honest as you can be without, I guess, scaring the reader off, I guess.
Yeah, and once again, it's this intimacy. Like, I'm letting readers in. It's a vulnerability, not an intimacy, but it's a vulnerability because I'm sharing with the readers how I was exposed to it,
right,
and how I visualized it, and so, or interpreted it, right. And Veronica has been great at taking the script and visualizing it.
The audience does matter, I presume, too, because you wouldn't write a story for, let's say, a more mature audience and apply that to a children's book, for example, right? You'd have to sort of mediate in between to find the right balance.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So that's the other thing, too. Once again, it goes back to how I was trained when I went to school and how I was able to make those connections in terms of like what I was told. Like, it was kind of like a reconnaissance for me, because I was going into school. I was there to absorb everything, and then how could I use it for my benefit, not for somebody else's benefit. I didn't want to just be like another cog in a wheel for animation. I wanted to tell stories, and so how can I tell those stories? So what are the tricks that I need to pay attention to? So that was kind of like, that was my reason for going to school.
Right. Do you think schools, I know I don't want you to generalize, but do you think schools actually prepare creators for proper storytelling, or is it just getting down the basics and then you have to go and learn it on your own?
That's a general term of I guess if you want, it all depends on the school you go to or what level you're going at. When you're going to a college, you're being trained to be a worker. Like, you're being trained to, I don't want to say you're not trained to think, but you're trained to be like, to jump in and be able to get the work done. If you're going to like a fine arts school or university, there's less technical training and more free thought or expression. So where I was at, I was kind of like that in between, where I wanted to be creative, but I also wanted to know how the system worked so that I could learn how to tell our stories in a way that non-Indigenous people would understand.
Well, it sounds like you've got some great methodology under your belt. Wondering, to switch gears a wee bit, do you have any upcoming projects that you can talk about? I know you're always busy with stuff.
Yeah, I think I've got a free minute somewhere that's not booked up yet.
Sure.
I just received the editor's feedback for the second part of The Adventures of Boogaloo, so I'm working on issue 2 right now, while at the same time working on an outline for the third story.
So it sounds like it's going to be a busy time for you.
Oh yeah, never a dull moment.
Well, with everything you've got on the go, where do you recommend people go online to find out about your current and your future work?
So you can check out a lot of the work that I've been part of. You can go to birchbarkcomics.com. I have all the projects that I've been part of that I've written. You can go visit Highwater Press to see the books that I've written for them. Or you can go visit istorystudio.com. That's another publishing company that I've done some work for. They tackle Indigenous health issues, and I've been really fortunate to do some work for them over the last decade, so it's been really great. And then you can also follow me on Instagram at writer Brandon Mitchell to see what I'm up to.
Sounds
where I'm
good.
going to be next.
That's it. Well, Brandon, those are all the questions I have, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
Like I said, for me, it's a collaborative process, right? Like, I'm one part of a team that helps get these stories out, right? Like, Veronica's been great with her visual style and understanding of animation with Gaju's Gift. Tara Otterbert has been a phenomenal creator and collaborator. We've worked together on this place, and also we tease each other because I got her into comics and she's got me into animation. So she's been giving me a great opportunity to direct some animated shorts.
Thanks to Brandon for the chat. You can discover more about Brandon on Twitter at MINDU1980 and on Instagram at writer Brandon Mitchell, and online at birchbarkcomics.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel and hit the notification button. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2022.